Welcome back. In our previous lesson, we learned how to create a new project. In this lesson, we're going to learn about the parameters in the Edit Project pane at the bottom of this window, how to modify them, and we'll also learn how to use these controls on the right-hand side of the dialog window. Let's review the first parameter, Project Type. It's currently defined as a Vault project. Let's right-click on this parameter. Let's change it to a single-user project. We'll be learning about the Vault-specific project options later in this section of the course, in our lesson about the Vault. Underneath Project Type is Location. Nothing happens when we right-click on this. We're not able to modify the location of this project right now. That's because it's the active project. We are able to modify the location of inactive projects from this part of the interface, however. Included File. This you'd use if you want to include the references and mapping from another project file. We can just browse here if we want to map another Inventor project file to this project. We scroll through our documents and choose only a project file. Let's cancel out of this window for now. This is a handy way of including the search paths of the included file in your current file. One note, the project type of the included file will override the setting in your current file. This is convenient for controlling a user's ability to modify a project. The next option we have is Use Style Library. Currently, it's set to Read Only. Let's right-click on this parameter. We've got three options here, Yes, Read Only, and No. A style library is a common source of styles for your design work, colors, materials, standards, and so on. Style libraries are shared between users in a manner like custom component libraries. Style libraries let a whole team easily share the same formatting standards, drafting standards, dimension precision measurements, materials, color, lighting schemes, sheet metal gauge, thickness, and many other possible parameters. It's in the project definition that we determine our interaction with existing style libraries. This is something we'll be coming back to later on in this course. Choosing Yes uses the style library that you define. We don't set up the style library from this interface, though. We just define whether we want to use one or not. By choosing Yes, you've got full read-write access to the styles in the library, and that means you can edit and change the styles in the library using the Save to Style Library command from an AutoDesk INVENTOR document. Now let's talk about the read-only setting. Read-only means you'll be using the library that you've defined, but no one can make any changes to it. The third option is No. This prevents a library from being used at all. Essentially, you determine the styles local to each document. For the purposes of our work in these tutorials, I'm going to stick with Yes. Right-click on Use Style Library and select Yes. Now let's talk about Workspace. The Workspace is the folder we selected for the project and its files when we created the project. You can only define one workspace per project. If you try to get around this system by opening files from outside of your workspace, Inventor is going to prompt you to let you know that there's an issue. Group search paths. This doesn't apply to Vault projects. This field shows the master work group for shared network locations where Autodesk Inventor searches for non-library files. You specify a workgroup at the time of project creation from this window here. Generally, each project should have one workgroup, but you may have reasons to establish more. Design team members check out files from the workgroup to edit in a personal workspace. When finished, designers check the changed files back into the workgroup. In a Vault project, a file used by one editor is just simply not available to others. A right-click on our current definition gives us a few options. Let's right-click on the heading now. We can add a path, add paths from file. This is where we can choose a project file from which all map paths are copied. And lastly, we can add paths from directory. Here we'd choose a folder whose paths directory structure is mapped. Now let's talk about libraries. Any libraries we set up while using the project wizard would be mapped here. We don't have any. Let's right-click on the heading. We're able to add a path or add paths from an Inventor project file. As with the workgroup and workspace categories, you can right-click on the library branch to access a delete command if you'd like to remove library paths that aren't needed by the project. Frequently used subfolders. Here we have a list of subfolders that are nested within a project workspace, workgroup, or library. You can right-click to add a shortcut to a folder from which you frequently open or save files. These shortcuts can save you quite a bit of time when you're navigating to your files. You can also click this plus sign, and from there browse to the location you need. The listed folders will appear as shortcuts in your Open, Save, and Place dialog boxes, so you can quickly navigate to the location. But they're not used to resolve locations, so keep that in mind. Shortcuts to frequently used subfolders are preferred rather than adding nested workgroups or nested workspaces, both of which are a really easy way to mess up your file referencing. As above, you can add a path, just another folder, or you can add all the paths that are included already in another project file, add paths from file, and you can also add folders within a directory by choosing the Add Paths from Directory option. One more thing about the paths you specify in the project editor. When you select folder paths for libraries, workspace, workgroups, etc., Inventor uses a relative path rather than absolute paths to the exact file. Notice under project location, I don't show the path to the exact project file. That's why it's so important to use descriptive, unique nomenclature. Under the Folder Options branch, we see where design data, templates, and Content Center files are stored for the active project. Currently, they're set to the default location. Design data includes all of our work and, for example, things like style definitions. This is where new file templates for the project are stored. Content Center. The Content Center is Inventor's enormous library of standard parts and features. Using this branch of the project editor, you can access other file locations than are specified. In other words, it's a project-specific override to the default settings. Doesn't change the default settings for any other project. Let me show you the interface where we specify the default location. Let's close the project editor. Let's save changes to our project. Now go to the Tools tab, Options panel, select Application Options, and let's go to the File tab. Here we see the relative paths to where Autodesk automatically stores default templates, design data, Content Center, project folders, etc. Let's cancel out of this window and return to the project editor. Get started. Projects. The Folder Options branch of the project editor is where we can override those settings on the Application Options dialog window. All you do is right-click, select Edit, and then browse for a new location. And let's cancel out of the Browse window. We'll be talking about how the Content Center works in great detail later on in this section of the course. Now let's expand the Options branch of the project editor. Each option here has a unique contextual menu. Old versions to keep on save is currently set to 1. The first time a file is saved in a project, an Old Versions folder is created. When the file is saved, the previous version is moved automatically to the Old Versions folder. Here you set how many old versions you want Inventor to hang on to in that folder. We right-click, select Edit, enter the number of old versions we'd like to keep, and press Enter. Here my setting is 1, so old versions will only contain one previous version, and all the other previous versions will be automatically deleted. Note that a backup file has the extension BAK. That's how you'll recognize the old version. Using unique file names, here you specify your intent to create unique names for all the files in your project, including the subfolders. You right-click and choose Yes or No. This helps Inventor manage your version control. It also helps you with version control when you're bringing a new file into a project. If a file is moved into your project, Autodesk searches through all editable project locations to find the file name, even if it was last accessed from a different folder. If you select No, you're telling Inventor that duplicate file names do indeed exist in your project. If duplicate names are found when resolving file references, the Resolve Files dialog box will open so you can browse to the correct file manually to re-establish the link, rather than Inventor choosing it for you. We're going to review this in greater detail later in this course, providing some examples. Because Inventor uses relative paths in an assembly to link subassemblies or single parts, Inventor files can be pretty easily relocated to, let's say, a different server or a drive without you having to reassemble and resolve every new path. However, for this reason, it's important to give your files unique names, since if you've got 2 files of the same name, Inventor might only load the first one. Next is Name. This refers to the actual name of your IPJ file. You're not able to edit the name of the active project, obviously. As you can see, when I right-click, the rename command is grayed out. I'm not able to rename this file right now. If I made a different project active, I could. Next, we've got the shortcut branch. This shows the shortcut name of the active project. That's what displays in the top part of this dialog window. To edit the shortcut name, just right-click and select Edit. Type in your new name and press Enter. It's from this branch that you can also delete a shortcut from the Select Project pane. Just right-click and select Delete. The shortcut will be deleted from the projects folder and won't display in the selected projects list, but the project file itself is not deleted. Owner, this identifies the project owner, typically the lead engineer or CAD administrator. Release ID, always a good idea to tag this. This identifies the version of the released project data. If a project is used as a library by another project, the release ID is going to be pretty useful in identifying which project to use. Your company probably has standard release nomenclature that you will follow. Now let's look at Imported Components folder name. The default name is Sensical. Imported Components. Can right-click and select Edit if we want to change that. If you need to import components but do want to save them in your workspace, this is the folder for you. It's created by default and the component files are saved by default to it. Imported Top-Level Assemblies folder name. By default, it shares the same name as the Imported Components folder. You right-click and select Edit, then type your new name and press Enter. If you've imported assembly files into your workspace but want to save them in your workspace separate from your parts, this folder is created and assembly files are saved to it. Now let's take a look at the buttons on the right-hand side of the project editor. These add, edit, and change the order of the search paths in the active project. All of them are grayed out right now. That's because I haven't selected any paths. Let's select Workgroup 3. Click the upward pointing arrow to move Workgroup 3 up the list of workgroups. Click the downward pointing arrow to move it down the list of existing workgroups. Clicking the plus icon is how you can add a new path. You can edit the name and browse for the location as required. Press Enter to accept. Let's add a library path. We'll select the Libraries branch. The plus sign becomes active. Let's click it to add a new path. We'll type in the name of the library. We'll call it Parts. Let's leave the default location. Press Enter to accept. And now we have a library mapped to this project. Let's make a change. Let's select the path and then click the Edit button. Hit Escape to exit. The same thing can be accomplished by right-clicking on the path and selecting Edit. Let's click outside the menu to close. The next tool we're going to look at is the Find Duplicate Files tool. This launches an application which lets you find non-unique project file names. This is a good way for you to locate files referenced in the project that share a name. Let's cancel out of this window. The last tool we have here you'll be using frequently. Click here to configure the Content Center. This launches the Configure Libraries dialog box. Here's where you edit the configuration to specify which content you want available to your project. Uncheck the In Use box to make a library unavailable to your current project. This link shows the location of the libraries. And as you can see, there are a number of different standards. Inventor's Content Center is an enormous library of standard parts and features, over 1 million parts with more than 18 different standards. Let's uncheck the ANSI and DIN standards. Those are the American National Standards and the German Institute of Standards, and let's restore them. We'll be coming back to this window in our subsequent lesson on configuring libraries and configuring the Content Center. Notice that the location of Libraries path is actually a link. We can click on this link to open up Windows Explorer. We're taken to the folder where the libraries are stored. We're able to see the location of the libraries by clicking on the link, but not change the path from this particular interface. Let's cancel out of the Configure Libraries window, and let's return to Windows Explorer to take a look at our project folder. Here's the library we mapped. Here's the old versions folder, and there's our backup file for the Inventor project document. Here's the source images folder that we created, the various work groups, and our workspace. Here is the project file itself. Now it's time to save our changes. Let's click the Save button. We're done modifying our project, so let's click the Done button. This will close the project editor. And this concludes our lesson about editing your first project.